The professor started his lecture. It's time to set aside myths. Religion as we understand it has hindered people for centuries. One of the most pervasive myths that continues to influence so many lives is the concept of Jesus. Let me clarify. Jesus is merely a tale, the professor went on. I realize this may be difficult for some of you to accept, but the evidence is compelling. Jesus Christ, as depicted in religious texts, never existed in the manner people assume. It's just a narrative like many others from ancient times. Elon Musk had been invited to the university as a guest speaker. He wasn't there to listen to the professor's lecture, but he couldn't help but overhear the discussion. Musk's keen intellect quickly absorbed the professor's words, and he felt a spark within him. It was time for someone to speak out. As the lecture wrapped up, the students began to gather their belongings. But Musk stayed seated, lost in contemplation. The professor, sensing that he had made his point, smiled with satisfaction at the quiet room. He relished stirring up controversy, but before he could leave the podium, Musk stood up. "Excuse me." Musk's voice echoed through the silence. The students turned their heads, eyes wide with curiosity. Why was Elon Musk, one of the most influential figures in the world, interrupting the professor's lecture? The professor glanced at Musk, slightly irritated. "Yes. Do you have something to add, Mr. Musk?" he asked with a patronizing smile. Musk took a deep breath before replying. "I've heard your arguments, and I must say you're mistaken," Musk stated, his tone calm yet assertive. The students gasped. No one ever dared to speak to the professor in such a manner. The professor raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "Oh, and what leads you to believe that Mr. Musk? Are you a theologian, a historian?" Musk shook his head. "No, I'm not. But I am someone who values truth, and the truth is that dismissing Jesus as a fairy tale is not only disrespectful but also intellectually lazy. There is ample historical evidence suggesting the existence of Jesus. Whether or not you believe in the religious elements of his life is your choice, but to assert that he's a fairy tale? That's not grounded in fact." The room was buzzing now. Students murmured to each other, shocked by Musk's audacity. The professor, however, was unfazed. "I see," he said with a smirk. "You're one of those who clings to ancient beliefs. Let me guess. You think science and faith can coexist?" Musk's eyes narrowed. "I believe there's room for both," he replied. "But what I truly think is that dismissing something simply because it doesn't fit your narrative is the opposite of science. Science is about exploration and discovery, not about shutting doors." The professor chuckled. "That's amusing coming from you. Aren't you the person who builds rockets and talks about colonizing Mars? What do you know about religion?" Musk smiled, but there was a fire in his eyes. "I know more than you realize," he said quietly, "and I'm not alone in this." The tension in the room was thick as Musk and the professor locked eyes. The students were on the edge of their seats, unable to look away from the unfolding drama. It was rare to see someone confront the professor, especially a figure as renowned as Elon Musk. Everyone wanted to see how this confrontation would unfold. The professor, sensing that he couldn't easily dismiss Musk, decided to engage him in a full debate. "All right, Mr. Musk," he said, crossing his arms, "since you seem so confident in your beliefs, let's hear your argument. Why should anyone believe in a figure like Jesus when there's no solid evidence of his existence?" Musk didn't hesitate. "You're mistaken about the evidence. There are numerous historical sources outside of religious texts that reference Jesus. Historians like Tacitus and Josephus mention him. These are independent sources that have no religious agenda. They describe a man who lived in the 1st century and had a significant impact on those around him." The professor waved his hand dismissively. "Ah, yes, the old argument about historical texts. But those could have been fabricated, written years after the events they describe. How do we know they're accurate?" Musk tilted his head, considering the question. "You're correct. We can't be 100% sure, but that's true for most historical figures. We rely on the evidence we have, and the evidence for Jesus, while not perfect, is more than enough to suggest he was a real person. It's not just about faith, it's about historical fact." The professor sneered. "And what about the miracles? Walking on water, turning water into wine? You expect me to believe that actually occurred?" Musk shrugged. I'm not asking you to believe in miracles. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that there was a man who lived, taught, and had a profound influence on the world. Whether or not you believe in the supernatural aspects of his life is a personal choice. But to dismiss him as a fairy tale? That's simply ignoring the facts. The students were riveted by Musk's every word. And even those who had sided with the professor earlier were beginning to reconsider. The atmosphere in the room was electric, the weight of the debate drawing everyone in. The professor, now clearly irritated, adjusted his glasses and leaned on the podium. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially by someone who wasn't an academic. Musk, he began, his tone cold and sharp. You may excel at building companies, but this is not your area of expertise. We are not here to discuss business or rockets. We are discussing history. And I don't need a billionaire to lecture me on it. Musk didn't flinch. His voice remained steady, but there was steel behind it. It's not about expertise in one field or another. It's about being open to the truth, wherever that truth may lead you. You assert that Jesus is a fairy tale, but your argument is based more on personal bias than fact. You've built a career on skepticism, and that's fine. Skepticism can lead to discovery, but when skepticism becomes dogma, it's no better than blind faith. The professor's face flushed red. Dogma? He retorted. I deal in facts, not fantasy, and the fact is, the story of Jesus is filled with inconsistencies and impossibilities. It's no more real than any other ancient myth. Musk shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. That's where you're mistaken. There's a distinction between myths and history. Myths are narratives that convey moral lessons, but don't necessarily have roots in real events. History, on the other hand, is grounded in reality. And while we may not know every detail about the life of Jesus, to label him a fairy tale is an oversimplification. It's intellectually dishonest. The professor bristled. So you believe in the resurrection then? You believe in all those miraculous stories from the Bible? Musk paused for a moment, carefully considering his response. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do believe that there's more to life than what we can see or explain. Science and faith aren't adversaries as you seem to think. They are different ways of understanding the universe, and to entirely dismiss one because it doesn't fit into the neat boxes you've created? That's not wisdom, that's arrogance. The room fell silent again as the students processed Musk's words. Some of them who had initially sided with the professor now found themselves questioning their own beliefs. Could it be that Musk was right? Could science and faith coexist? Could there be more to Jesus than the professor was willing to acknowledge? The professor was not accustomed to being questioned in this manner. He was losing control of the conversation, and he recognized it. His once confident voice now wavered slightly as he spoke. So what's your solution, Mr. Musk? Should we all just believe in these ancient tales? Should we stop relying on science and start praying for miracles? Musk's expression softened. He wasn't there to win an argument for the sake of victory. He was there to share a different perspective. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm saying is that we should remain open-minded. Science provides us with incredible tools to understand the physical world. But it doesn't have all the answers. Faith, philosophy, and yes, even history provide other kinds of answers. Answers that science alone cannot offer. Dismissing the figure of Jesus, because we can't scientifically prove everything about him, is missing the point. The professor sneered again, but this time there was less conviction in his voice. And what point is that? Musk stepped forward, addressing not just the professor but the entire room. The point is that figures like Jesus shape our world, not just through what they may or may not have done, but through the ideas they left behind. Whether or not you believe in the miracles, the teachings of Jesus have profoundly impacted billions of lives throughout history. To ignore that, because it doesn't align with your worldview, is to miss the bigger picture. The students were captivated by his every word. Even those who had never given religion much thought were beginning to see things differently. Musk wasn't asking them to believe blindly. He was encouraging them to think critically, to question their assumptions. The professor, sensing that he was losing the crowd, attempted one last retort. You can't base your understanding of the world on ancient texts and unproven stories. That's not how progress is made. Musk didn't miss a beat. Progress isn't achieved by rejecting everything that doesn't fit into our current understanding. It's made by exploring new ideas, by being curious, by asking questions. That's what science is about, isn't it? Not closing doors, but opening them. The professor stood at the front of the room, his confidence visibly shaken. He had expected to dominate the conversation, to assert his authority and silence any opposition. But Musk had not only held his ground, he had turned the argument on its head. The students who had once been eager to follow the professor's lead were now looking at him with doubt in their eyes, sensing the shift in the room. Musk continued, "You talk about progress, Professor, but real progress comes from understanding our past as well as our future. Ignoring a figure as significant as Jesus just because you don't believe in the religious aspects of his life is a mistake. His teachings have influenced laws, governments, and entire societies. Whether you believe in the miracles or not, you can't deny that." The professor opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. For the first time, he wasn't sure how to counter Musk's argument. He had always relied on his intellect, on his ability to dismantle arguments with cold, hard logic. But Musk wasn't playing that game. He was appealing to something deeper, something that the professor couldn't easily dismiss. Finally, the professor spoke, his voice quieter than before. "And what do you believe, Mr. Musk? Do you believe in Jesus?" Musk paused, the question lingering in the air. "I believe in the power of ideas," he said thoughtfully. "And I believe in Jesus." He had some of the most powerful ideas in history. Whether or not you believe in miracles, the message of love, compassion, and understanding is something we can all learn from. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the awkward, tense silence from earlier in the debate. It was a silence of reflection, of contemplation. The students were genuinely considering what Musk had articulated. As the class concluded, the professor realized he had lost the debate. But in losing, he had gained something far more valuable than a victory. He had acquired a new perspective, a new way of viewing the world. Musk had challenged him not just intellectually, but emotionally, forcing him to confront his own biases and assumptions. The students exited the room, many of them deep in thought. Some would go on to conduct more research, questioning their own beliefs. Others would discuss the debate with friends and family. But all of them would remember the day Elon Musk stood up to the professor and altered their worldview. Musk, for his part, simply smiled as he departed the lecture hall. He hadn't come to win an argument. He had come to open minds, to encourage people to think differently. And in that, he had succeeded. The professor watched him leave, feeling a strange mix of frustration and admiration. He had been so certain of himself, so convinced that his view of the world was the only correct one. But Musk had shown him that there was more to the story, more to life, than he had been willing to acknowledge. As the door closed behind Musk, the professor found himself smiling for the first time in a long while. As the last of the students exited the room, the professor remained at the front, lost in thought. The debate had not unfolded as he had anticipated. Musk had challenged him in unexpected ways. He was accustomed to winning arguments, silencing dissent with facts and logic. But today something different occurred. Musk hadn't just argued with facts. He had touched on something deeper, something that resonated with everyone present. The professor sat down at his desk, staring at the empty seats. He had spent years teaching that religion was merely a collection of myths, that faith had no place in the modern world. Yet, here was a man known for his scientific accomplishments, for pushing the boundaries of technology, defending the very thing the professor had spent his career dismissing. He couldn't shake the feeling that Musk had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, a seed that was already beginning to grow. For years, he had been convinced that science had all the answers, that there was nothing beyond what could be measured and observed. But now, he wasn't so certain. Could it be that there was more to life than what science could explain? Could it be that faith and reason weren't mutually exclusive? As he contemplated these questions, he realized that he had been too quick to dismiss the significance of figures like Jesus. Whether or not the miracles were real, the teachings of Jesus had profoundly shaped the course of history. Musk was right about that. And maybe, just maybe, the professor had been wrong to dismiss it all as fairy tales. Later that evening, the professor sat in his office, reviewing his old notes. He had always prided himself on being open-minded, on questioning everything. But he now recognized that he had allowed his skepticism to close his mind. He had been so certain that he was right, that he had all the answers. But perhaps it was time to ask new questions, to explore ideas he had once disregarded. He looked at the stack of papers on his desk, the research he had intended to publish on the historical inaccuracies of religious texts. He had been working on it for months, convinced that it would solidify his reputation as a thought leader. But now he wasn't sure if he wanted to proceed with it. Something within him had shifted during that debate with Musk. Maybe it was time to reevaluate his approach, to reconsider the role of faith in human history. As he sat there, deep in thought, he realized that the most important lesson of the day had not been about winning or losing an argument. It had been about being open to new ideas, about challenging one's own assumptions. In the end, Musk had done more than just challenge the professor's beliefs. He had inspired him to think differently. The next day, when the professor walked into his classroom, he noticed a change in the atmosphere. The students were no longer looking at him with blind acceptance. They were curious, eager to engage in real discussions, to ask questions, and challenge the status quo. It was a change the professor welcomed. As he began his lecture, he made a promise to himself. From now on, he would encourage his students to think for themselves, to explore all sides of an argument, even if it made them uncomfortable. He would no longer dismiss ideas simply because they didn't fit neatly into his worldview. Instead, he would approach them with the same curiosity and open-mindedness that Musk had demonstrated. In the days and weeks that followed, the professor noticed a shift, not only in his students, but in himself as well. He found himself rethinking many of the assumptions he had held for years. He began reading books on philosophy and religion, not to dismantle them, but to understand them on their own terms. He found himself appreciating the depth and complexity of the ideas he had once dismissed as mere superstition. One evening, as he sat in his office, the professor received an email from one of his students. It was a simple message thanking him for the debate with Musk. The student wrote that the discussion had changed the way they thought about life, about science, and about faith. It had inspired them to ask deeper questions, to seek a better understanding of the world. The professor smiled as he read the email. He realized that in losing the debate, he had gained something far more valuable than a victory. He had gained a new perspective, a new way of thinking, and most importantly, a renewed sense of curiosity. The debate with Elon Musk had not just been about whether Jesus was a fairy tale or a historical figure. It had been about the importance of maintaining an open mind, of being willing to question even the things we think we know for certain. It had been about embracing the complexity of the world rather than trying to fit everything into neat, tidy explanations. As the professor closed his laptop and prepared to head home, he knew that he was not the same person he had been before the debate. He had been humbled, not by Musk's wealth or intellect, but by his willingness to explore the unknown, to admit that there were things beyond our understanding. For the first time in years, the professor felt a sense of peace, knowing that it was acceptable to not have all the answers. It was acceptable to question, to wonder, and to believe in things that couldn't always be explained. It was, after all, part of being human. And so the professor's journey continued, not as a man who had all the answers, but as a man who was willing to keep asking questions. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe, and help us bring you more exciting stories involving celebrities. Here you will be updated every day on the world of celebrities. See you soon.